Lyra didn't know that the Alpha King could scent his fated mate through any disguise. She didn't know that her carefully planned deception was unravelling with every heartbeat. And she certainly didn't know that the most dangerous man in the kingdom was already planning to protect her. The memory of Marcus's screams still echoed in her mind as she stood before the palace gates, her heart hammering against the tight bindings beneath her stolen servant's tunic. 3 days ago, Lord Blackthorn's men had dragged her brother from their cottage in the dead of night, his terrified eyes the last thing she'd seen before the door slammed shut. The ransom note had been clear: information about the Alpha King's military strategies, or Marcus would die slowly in Blackthorn's dungeons. Lyra touched her shorn hair, the unfamiliar shortness still shocking her fingers. The auburn waves that had once cascaded down her back now barely brushed her jawline, carefully styled to give her a boyish appearance. She practiced walking with longer strides, deepening her voice, holding her shoulders broader. Everything depended on this deception working. The palace rose before her like a golden mountain, its spires catching the morning light and throwing it back in brilliant flashes. She'd never seen anything so magnificent, so impossibly grand. Servants in matching blue livery moved through the courtyards with practiced efficiency, and she forced herself to walk among them as if she belonged, as if she wasn't a desperate girl wearing her dead father's clothes and carrying forged papers. "You there?" called a stern voice. The head steward, a thin man with iron-grey hair, approached with measuring eyes. "Kai Thornwood?" "Yes, sir." She'd practiced those words 100 times, pitching her voice just low enough, adding a rough edge she'd heard from the village boys. "You'll work the royal chambers. It's an honour not usually given to new servants, but we're short-staffed and the king specifically requested additional attendance." His gaze swept over her critically. "You seem young for such responsibility." "I'm older than I look, sir, and I work hard." The steward nodded curtly. "See that you do. The king tolerates no laziness, no mistakes. You'll serve his meals, tend the fires, and maintain his private study. Speak only when spoken to, keep your eyes down, and remember that you are invisible unless he needs something." Invisible. If only he knew how desperately she needed to be exactly that. An hour later, Lyra found herself standing in the most opulent room she'd ever imagined. King Darius's private chambers were a study in elegant power, rich burgundy tapestries, a fireplace large enough to stand in, and a massive oak desk covered with maps and correspondence. The scent of sandalwood and something indefinably masculine filled the air. She was arranging wine goblets on a silver tray when the door opened, and he walked in. Time stopped. King Darius was nothing like the distant figure she'd glimpsed from afar during royal processions. Up close, he was overwhelming. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that caught hints of gold in the firelight, and eyes that were the most unusual colour she'd ever seen. Silver shot through with amber, like molten metal. There was something primal about him, something that made every instinct in her body go haywire. Their eyes met across the room, and Lyra felt the world shift. Heat flooded through her body, starting from her chest and radiating outward like she'd stepped too close to a forge. There was a sensation she couldn't name, like a golden thread had suddenly pulled taut between them, connecting them in a way that made no sense. Her breath caught, her hands trembling so violently she nearly dropped the tray. "Careful," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through her bones. He moved closer, and the heat intensified. "You're new?" It wasn't a question. Somehow she managed to nod, not trusting her voice. His gaze was intense, penetrating, as if he could see straight through her careful disguise to the desperate girl beneath. "What's your name?" "Kai, Your Majesty." The words came out rougher than she'd intended, partly from nerves and partly from whatever was happening to her voice under his scrutiny. "Kai." He said her false name like he was testing the flavour of it. "Where are you from?" She'd prepared for this question. "Millhaven, Your Majesty, my family. We lost our farm. I came seeking work." Something flickered in his expression, understanding perhaps, or sympathy. Loss is a hard teacher. His voice was gentler now, and somehow that made the heat in her chest burn brighter. "Have you served in a noble house before?" "No, Your Majesty, but I learn quickly." "I'm sure you do." He was still studying her face with an intensity that made her want to squirm. "You have interesting eyes, Kai." Panic flared. Her eyes were distinctive, green with gold flecks that Marcus had always said looked like forest pools touched by sunlight. She'd hoped the masculine clothes and short hair would distract from such details, but apparently not enough. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she managed. "Tell me," he said, moving close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Do you feel called to something greater than farm work? Something that might require courage?" The question was strange, loaded with meaning she couldn't decipher. Did he suspect something? Her pulse hammered against her throat as she tried to read his expression. I'm not sure what you mean, Your Majesty." He smiled then, and it transformed his entire face. Where before he'd been intimidating, now he seemed almost kind. Never mind, it was merely curiosity. He gestured to a group of men entering the chamber. "My council arrives. You may pour the wine." The next hour passed in a blur of careful movements and stolen glances. Lyra served wine to powerful lords who barely acknowledged her existence, but she was acutely aware of the king's attention following her around the room. Every time she looked up, those strange silver-gold eyes were on her, watching with an intensity that made her skin prickle. When Lord Aldrich made a dismissive comment about her clumsy handling of the wine, she'd been so distracted by the king's gaze that her hands had indeed been unsteady. She expected a reprimand. Instead, the king's voice cut through the room like a blade. "He stays close to me." The absolute authority in those words silenced the room. Lord Aldrich's mouth snapped shut, and every other lord suddenly found their wine glasses fascinating. The king's protection was unmistakable, and Lyra felt that golden thread sensation pulse stronger. "Your Majesty?" Lord Aldrich tried again, more carefully, surely a more experienced servant. "Are you questioning my judgment, Lord Aldrich?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The king's voice remained pleasant, but there was steel beneath the silk, and every man in the room recognised it. "Of course not, Your Majesty," Aldrich said quickly. "Good, then we understand each other." As the meeting continued, Lyra tried to focus on her duties, but her mind kept circling back to those words. "He stays close to me." Why would the most powerful man in the kingdom protect a lowly servant he'd just met? It made no sense. When the council finally departed, Lyra began clearing the wine goblets with hands that still weren't entirely steady. The king remained seated at his desk, but she could feel his attention like a physical weight. "Kai?" She turned, goblets clutched against her chest. "Your Majesty?" "Tomorrow you'll serve breakfast in my private dining chamber at dawn, just the two of us." It wasn't a request. "Can you manage that without Lord Aldrich's supervision?" "Yes, Your Majesty." "Good." He stood, moving with a predator's grace, and approached until he was close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his eyes. "One more thing, Your Majesty." "Stay close to me, Kai, always." The words sent that impossible heat racing through her body again, and she nodded because she couldn't trust her voice. He studied her face for another long moment, then nodded once and dismissed her with a gesture. Lyra fled to the servants' quarters, her mind reeling. Alone in the small chamber she'd been assigned, she pressed her back against the door and tried to understand what had happened. The heat was still there, a warm glow centred in her chest that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw silver-gold eyes watching her with impossible intensity. She touched her chest where the sensation was strongest and whispered into the darkness, "What's happening to me?" The golden thread feeling pulsed once, as if in answer, but she was no closer to understanding. All she knew was that tomorrow she would serve the king breakfast. And somehow, despite all her careful plans, the most dangerous part of her mission wasn't going to be stealing information. It was going to be remembering why she was there at all. The days that followed were a dangerous dance of proximity and pretense. Each morning at dawn, Lyra found herself in King Darius's private chambers, lighting the massive fireplace while he read correspondence at his desk. The routine should have been simple: bring breakfast, tend the fire, organize his war maps, remain invisible. Instead, every moment crackled with tension she couldn't name. He watched her, constantly, not in the dismissive way nobles usually observed servants, checking for competence or mistakes. His attention was focused, intent, as if she were a puzzle he was slowly solving. Those silver-gold eyes followed her movements as she arranged his papers, tracked the careful way she poured his coffee, lingered on her face when she thought he wasn't looking. "Tell me about Millhaven," he said, on the third morning, his voice carrying that same gentle rumble that made her chest warm. Lyra's hand stilled on the map she was straightening. She'd prepared stories about the fictional farming village, but something about his tone made her wary. "It's small, Your Majesty, quiet, nothing like the capital." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those unsettling eyes. "What did your family grow?" "Barley mostly, some wheat." The lies came easier now, worn smooth by repetition. "The harvest failed 2 years running. We lost everything." "That must have been difficult, losing your home, your sense of place." There was understanding in his voice, genuine sympathy that made her stomach clench with guilt. "Do you miss it?" The question caught her off guard. Did she miss the cottage where she'd grown up with Marcus, where their parents had told them stories by the fire and their mother had taught her to braid her hair, where everything had been simple and safe before Lord Blackthorn's shadow fell across their lives? "Yes," she whispered, and the honesty in that single word made her voice crack slightly. Something shifted in his expression. Before she could step back, he was standing, moving around the desk with that predatory grace. "Your voice," he said softly. Panic flared. "Your Majesty?" "It's deeper in the mornings, rougher, but sometimes—" He was close now, close enough that she could smell sandalwood and cedar and something uniquely him. "Sometimes it's soft, like just now." Her heart hammered against her ribs. The cold air affects my throat, Your Majesty." "Does it?" His head tilted slightly, and she had the distinct impression of being studied by something far more dangerous than a king. "How old are you, Kai?" 19, Your Majesty." At least that wasn't a lie. 19, he said it thoughtfully. "Old enough to have seen hardship, young enough to still hope for better." His eyes searched her face. "What do you hope for?" The question was so unexpected, so personal, that she forgot to guard her response. "Safety," she said immediately. "For my family to be safe." "Family?" His voice sharpened slightly. "I thought you said you lost them." The mistake hit her like cold water. She scrambled for recovery. "My brother? He's all I have left. He found work in another village, but these are dangerous times." "Yes," King Darius said quietly, "they are." His hand lifted, and for one heart-stopping moment she thought he might touch her face. Instead, he gestured toward the window. "That's why I do this. The maps, the strategies, the endless council meetings. Every decision I make affects someone's family, someone's hope for safety." There was weariness in his voice that made her chest ache. For the first time, she saw past the crown and the power to the man beneath, someone who carried the weight of an entire kingdom on his shoulders. "It must be lonely," she said softly, then immediately wanted to take the words back. Servants didn't offer comfort to kings, but instead of anger, his expression gentled. "It is, more than you know." He moved back toward his desk, but his eyes remained on her. "Tell me, Kai, have you ever felt called to something, as if fate were pulling you toward a purpose you didn't understand?" The golden thread sensation pulsed in her chest, stronger than ever. She pressed her hand there unconsciously. Sometimes, like there's something I'm supposed to do, but I don't know what it is. Yes. His voice was barely above a whisper. Exactly like that. The moment stretched between them, charged with meaning she couldn't decipher. Then a knock at the door shattered the spell. "Enter!" the king called, and Lord Aldrich stepped in, his cold gaze immediately finding Lyra. "Your Majesty, the morning reports require your attention. Perhaps you could dismiss your servant so we can discuss matters of importance." Lyra started toward the door, but the king's voice stopped her. "Kai stays. He's proving quite useful for organising my maps and correspondence." Lord Aldrich's mouth tightened. Surely such tasks could be handled by someone more experienced. "Are you questioning my judgment again, Lord Aldrich?" The king's tone was pleasant, but there was warning beneath the silk. "Because I seem to recall we discussed this yesterday." "Of course not, Your Majesty. I merely thought—" "Then we understand each other. Kai, please continue with the maps." As Lord Aldrich launched into reports about border skirmishes and supply issues, Lyra focused on her task, but she was acutely aware of the protection the king had just extended. Again. Why would he shield a servant from a lord's displeasure? It made no sense. The meeting lasted an hour, and through it all she felt the king's attention on her even as he discussed military strategies. When Lord Aldrich mentioned increased activity from Lord Blackthorn's forces, her hands stilled on the maps. Marcus. Was her brother somewhere in those enemy territories, suffering while she played servant in luxury? "The reports suggest Blackthorn is planning something significant," Lord Aldrich was saying. "We should increase patrols along the eastern border." "Agreed. Double the watch and send scouts to monitor his known strongholds." The king's voice was crisp with authority. "What of the missing nobles? Any word on their whereabouts?" Lyra's breath caught. Missing nobles. Was Marcus counted among them? "None, Your Majesty. It's as if they simply vanished. No ransom demands, no bodies found. It's concerning." "Indeed. Continue the search. I want those people found." When Lord Aldrich finally left, the chamber fell into comfortable silence. Lyra continued organising papers, but her mind raced. The king was actively searching for missing nobles. Did that include commoners like Marcus? Or was her brother simply another casualty in Blackthorn's games? "You're troubled," the king observed. She looked up to find him watching her again, those perceptive eyes missing nothing. "Your Majesty." "Your hands, they're shaking." He stood and crossed to her, moving with that careful grace. "What frightened you about our discussion?" The truth sat on her tongue like poison. "My brother is one of those missing people. I'm here to steal your military secrets to save him." Instead, she said, "The missing nobles, Your Majesty. It's frightening to think people can simply disappear." "Yes, it is." His voice was grim. "But I promise you this. I will find them, every single one, and those responsible will pay for their crimes." The fierce certainty in his voice made her chest tight. He meant it. This wasn't political posturing or empty promises. King Darius genuinely cared about his people's safety, even those who couldn't protect themselves. "You have a good heart, Your Majesty," she whispered. He went very still. "What did you say?" Heat flooded her cheeks as she realised how that sounded. Too personal, too soft, too much like something a woman might say. I only meant that you care about your people. It's admirable." "Kai." Her false name on his lips sounded different somehow, warmer. "Look at me." Slowly she raised her eyes to meet his. He was closer than she'd realised, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his unusual eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "Have you ever wanted something you knew you couldn't have?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that made her pulse race. "Yes," she breathed before she could stop herself. "What do you do with that wanting?" I try to ignore it, tell myself it's impossible." "And if it's not impossible? If the only thing standing between you and what you want is fear?" His hand lifted, fingers almost brushing her cheek, before he caught himself and let it fall. The almost touch left her skin tingling, and she found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by that inexplicable golden thread that seemed to connect them. "I don't know," she whispered. "Neither do I," he admitted, his voice rough. "But I'm beginning to think fear is a luxury I can't afford." The air between them crackled with tension, and for one impossible moment she thought he might kiss her. Her lips parted involuntarily, and his eyes darkened, tracking the movement. Then urgent knocking shattered the moment. "Your Majesty!" a voice called through the door. "The Council requires your immediate presence. Reports of Blackthorn's forces moving toward Millbrook." Lyra jerked backward as if burned, reality crashing over her like ice water. What was she doing? She was here to save Marcus, not get swept away by impossible feelings for a man who would have her executed if he knew the truth. The king's jaw tightened with frustration, but he stepped back. "Enter!" As his aide burst in with urgent reports, Lyra used the distraction to retreat toward the door. But the king's voice stopped her. "Kai?" She turned, her heart still racing. "We'll continue this conversation later." It wasn't a request. It was a promise that made her pulse skip and her chest burn with that golden warmth. As she slipped from the room, his words echoed in her mind, along with the memory of his almost touch. She was in serious trouble, and it had nothing to do with her mission. The opportunity came 2 nights later, when whispers in the servants' quarters spoke of an urgent council meeting that would run past midnight. Lyra had spent the day in torment, every interaction with King Darius a careful dance between her growing feelings and her desperate mission. When he'd asked about her family again during the afternoon meal service, she'd nearly broken down and told him everything. The way he listened, really listened, made her forget that she was supposed to be gathering intelligence rather than sharing pieces of her soul. But Marcus's face haunted her dreams. Every day that passed was another day her brother suffered in Blackthorn's dungeons. She couldn't afford to lose sight of why she was here, no matter how the king's silver-gold eyes made her feel safe for the first time in months. The palace settled into quiet as the midnight hour approached. Lyra slipped from her small chamber, moving through shadowed corridors with practiced silence. She'd memorized the layout over the past few days. Servants were invisible, able to move through spaces nobles never noticed. The king's private study was on the 3rd floor, and if the council meeting was running late as expected, it would be empty. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she climbed the narrow servants' staircase. The stolen master key felt heavy in her palm, procured from the head steward's office during the chaos of the evening meal. She would have to return it before dawn, but for now it was her path to the information that might save Marcus. The study door opened soundlessly on well-oiled hinges. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the massive desk where she'd organised papers just that morning. Maps were spread across the surface, detailed drawings of territories, trade routes and military positions. Her hands shook as she approached, knowing that somewhere in these documents was intelligence about Blackthorn's strongholds. She found what she needed in the 3rd drawer, reconnaissance reports detailing enemy positions and a map marked with red ink showing suspected locations of missing nobles. Her breath caught as she traced the markings: mountain fortresses, hidden camps, places where Marcus might be held. The sound of footsteps in the corridor made her freeze. They were measured, deliberate, not the quick scurrying of a servant, but the confident stride of someone who belonged here. Panic flooded her system as she realized the footsteps were approaching the study. She looked around desperately for somewhere to hide, but the room was too open, too exposed. The door opened. King Darius stepped into the moonlit study, and his silver-gold eyes found her immediately. No surprise crossed his features, no shock or anger, just a patient, knowing expression that made her stomach drop to her feet. "Looking for something specific?" he asked calmly, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Lyra's mind raced through explanations, excuses, anything that might salvage this disaster. "Your Majesty, I was cleaning. I noticed the maps were disorganized and thought—" "At midnight?" He moved closer, and she backed against the desk, the reconnaissance report still clutched in her trembling hands. "With a stolen key." Her mouth went dry. He knew. Somehow he knew everything. "I can explain," she whispered. "I'm sure you can. You're quite creative with explanations." He was close enough now that she could see the gold flecks dancing in his eyes. "But I'm more interested in the truth." "I don't know what you mean." "Lyra." Her real name on his lips hit like a physical blow. She staggered backward, but there was nowhere to go. The desk pressed against her spine, and the king's presence filled the space in front of her, calm and patient and utterly inescapable. "How?" she breathed. "I've known what you are from the moment you walked into my palace." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched a strand of her short hair. "Did you really think a haircut and men's clothing could disguise your scent, your essence?" "My scent?" Confusion mixed with her panic. "I don't understand." "Fated mates." His voice was gentle, as if he were explaining something simple to a child. "The bond that connects two souls across time and space. I could find you in a crowd of thousands, little mate. A disguise means nothing to supernatural recognition." The words hit her like a landslide. Fated mates. The golden thread she'd been feeling, the inexplicable heat, the way her body responded to his presence. It wasn't her imagination. It was real. They were connected by something beyond human understanding. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Is it? Have you never felt the pull between us? The warmth that spreads through your chest when I'm near?" His hand moved to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin with devastating gentleness. "Haven't you wondered why you feel safe with me, despite everything you've been taught to fear?" She had. Every moment in his presence had felt like coming home to something she'd never known she was missing. But that only made this worse. "You knew," she said, her voice breaking. "This whole time you knew I was lying to you." "Yes." "Then why didn't you stop me? Why didn't you have me arrested?" His other hand came up to frame her face, silver gold eyes intense with emotion she couldn't name. "Because I was waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For you to trust me enough to tell me yourself." His thumbs traced across her cheekbones, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "However long it took, I was willing to wait." The kindness in his voice broke something inside her chest. All her careful walls crumbled at once, and the truth poured out like a dam bursting. "He has my brother," she sobbed. "Blackthorn took Marcus 3 days before I came here. He said he'd kill him unless I brought information about your military strategies. Marcus is all I have left. He's my twin, my other half, and they're torturing him while I've been playing dress-up and falling for—" She cut herself off, but it was too late. The confession hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying. "Falling for me?" His voice was soft. "It doesn't matter," she said desperately. "You'll have me executed now anyway. Just please don't make Marcus pay for my failure. He didn't know about any of this." Instead of anger or betrayal, King Darius's expression filled with something that looked almost like wonder. "Lyra, look at me." Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his. "Your family is my family now," he said, with absolute certainty. "Your brother is my brother. We'll bring him home." "What?" "Blackthorn made a mistake when he took someone precious to my mate. I don't negotiate with kidnappers." His voice turned hard, dangerous. "I eliminate them." "I don't understand. Why would you help me? I came here to betray you." "Because you didn't betray me. You've had dozens of opportunities to steal information and disappear into the night, but instead you've spent your time organising my maps and worrying about my burdens." His smile was soft, transforming his entire face. "You could have seduced me for information, but instead you've been fighting your attraction every step of the way. Even now, caught red-handed in my study, your first concern is protecting your brother and accepting punishment for yourself." But I was going to— Were you? Or were you looking for ways to save him without hurting me? The question stopped her cold. Was that what she'd been doing? Even now, looking at the reconnaissance reports in her hands, she realised she'd been searching for intelligence about Blackthorn's locations, not information that would compromise the king's strategies. "I don't know," she admitted. "I do." He leaned closer, his forehead touching hers. "You have the most honourable heart I've ever encountered. Even in desperation, you couldn't bring yourself to truly betray someone you care about." "How can you be so certain?" "Because the mate bond doesn't just connect our souls, Lyra. It reflects our true natures. And your soul—" He closed his eyes briefly, as if savouring something precious. "Your soul calls to everything good in mine." The golden thread between them pulsed stronger, and she felt something settle into place, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. "The warmth," she whispered. "The feeling of being pulled toward you. The bond recognising its match." His hands were still framing her face, thumbs stroking gently across her skin. "I've been waiting my entire life for you, Lyra. I just never expected you to arrive wearing men's clothing and planning an infiltration." Despite everything, she almost smiled. It seemed like a good plan at the time. "It was a terrible plan. You're far too beautiful to pass as a boy for long." "You knew from the beginning?" "The moment you walked into my palace, every instinct I possessed started screaming, 'Mate!' It took all my self-control not to claim you immediately." "Claim me?" Heat flickered in his eyes. "Mark you as mine. Make it clear to every male in the kingdom that you're under my protection." His voice dropped to a rough whisper. "Make it clear to you that you belong with me." The intensity in his words sent fire racing through her veins. "Darius," she breathed, his name slipping from her lips without the formal address. "Say it again!" "Darius." This time it came out like a prayer, like something sacred. "I've been waiting for you to trust me enough to tell me the truth," he murmured against her forehead. "And I've been waiting for you to trust yourself enough to stop fighting what's between us." "I'm scared," she admitted. "This is all too much, too fast. 3 days ago I was just a farm girl, and now you're telling me we're fated mates and offering to rescue my brother." Fear is understandable. This bond, this connection, it's overwhelming. But Lyra— He pulled back to meet her eyes. "I will never hurt you. I will never force you into anything. The bond exists, but the choice to accept it is always yours." "And if I can't? If I'm too broken by everything that's happened?" "Then I'll wait," he said simply. "However long you need, I'll wait. But I will not let you face Blackthorn alone. Brother or no bond, no one threatens someone under my protection." The sincerity in his voice, the absolute certainty, made her chest tight with emotions she couldn't name. "Why?" "Because you walked into my palace wearing terrible disguises and planning an impossible mission to save someone you love." His smile was soft. "Because you've spent 3 days worrying more about my well-being than your own safety. Because when you look at me, I see who I could be instead of who I have to be." Tears spilled down her cheeks again. "I don't know how to be anyone other than someone who's fighting for survival." "Then don't be anyone else. Just—" He leaned closer, his breath warm against her lips. "Let me fight with you instead of against you." The space between them crackled with possibility. All she had to do was lean forward, close the distance, and everything would change. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "Marcus," she whispered. "We'll find him," Darius promised. "Together. But first I need to know, are you ready to trust me with the truth? All of it?" She looked into his silver gold eyes, seeing patience and understanding, and something that looked almost like love. The golden thread between them hummed with warmth, and for the first time in months she felt like she might actually be safe. "Yes," she breathed, "I'm ready." Dawn broke over the palace in shades of gold and crimson, and for the first time in days Lyra felt like she could breathe. The night had passed in a whirlwind of planning and preparation. After her confession in the study, Darius had gathered his most trusted commanders for an emergency meeting. No longer hiding behind her disguise, Lyra had sat beside him as an equal, sharing everything she knew about Blackthorn's operations and the intelligence she'd gathered before her brother's kidnapping. The mountain fortress, Captain Thorne had said, pointing to the map Lyra had described. "We've suspected Blackthorn was using it as a stronghold, but we've never had confirmation." "Lyra's information matches our intelligence," Darius had replied, his hand warm and steady on her shoulder. "If Marcus is being held there, we can reach him within 2 days' hard riding." Now, as morning light filled Darius's private chambers, Lyra stood before a mirror that reflected a stranger. Gone was the awkward boy in ill-fitting clothes. The woman looking back at her wore a deep blue gown that flowed like water, her auburn hair restored to its natural waves and pinned with silver combs. She looked like herself for the first time in weeks. "Devastating," Darius murmured from behind her, and she met his eyes in the mirror. "I knew you were beautiful, but seeing you as you truly are—" Heat flooded her cheeks. "It feels strange. I'd almost forgotten what I looked like as myself." He moved closer, his hands settling on her shoulders, and the mate bond hummed with warmth between them. "You're magnificent, Lyra, every inch the queen you were born to be." "Queen?" The word came out as a whisper. "Did you think this was temporary, that I would let my fated mate simply disappear once we rescue your brother?" His voice was gentle but certain. "You're mine now, Lyra, just as I'm yours. The bond doesn't break, and I don't want it to." Before she could respond, urgent knocking interrupted them. "Your Majesty!" Captain Thorne's voice carried through the door, tight with alarm. "We're under attack!" Darius moved instantly, his entire demeanour shifting from tender mate to battle-ready king. "Report!" "Blackthorn's forces. They've breached the outer walls. It appears to be a coordinated assault, at least 200 men, possibly more." Lyra's blood ran cold. "He knows. Somehow he knows I'm here." Darius's eyes flashed silver gold, and she felt a surge of primal power through the bond. "Then he's made his last mistake. Captain, deploy the guard. I want every entrance secured." "Sir, they're specifically asking for the girl. They know she's here." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Lyra had never seen anything like the expression that crossed Darius's face, pure, lethal fury that made every instinct in her body recognize him as an apex predator. "They want my mate?" His voice was deadly quiet. "Then they can face me for her." "Darius, no!" Lyra caught his arm as he moved toward his weapon rack. "This is my fault. I brought this danger to your door." He turned to her, and the intensity in his eyes took her breath away. "Listen to me very carefully, little mate. You are under my protection now. That means anyone who threatens you threatens me, and I protect what's mine." The possessiveness in his voice sent fire racing through her veins, but worry overshadowed everything else. "There are too many of them. You could be hurt." "I could be hurt," he agreed, strapping on his sword belt with efficient movements, "but they will definitely be destroyed." His hands cupped her face, thumbs stroking across her cheekbones. "Stay close to Captain Thorne. If something happens to me—" "Nothing will happen to you," she said fiercely, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "Because I won't let it?" Something shifted in his expression. "Lyra." "I'm not a helpless farm girl, Darius. I've been fighting for survival my entire life. If Blackthorn wants me, he can try to take me, but he'll have to go through both of us." "You don't understand the danger." "I understand that my mate is about to face 200 men to protect me. I understand that my brother is still in Blackthorn's hands, and this might be our only chance to stop him." She met his eyes steadily. "And I understand that I'm not hiding while you fight my battles." For a moment she thought he might argue. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "You magnificent, stubborn woman. Is that a yes? That's a stay behind me and don't take any unnecessary risks." He pulled her close for a quick, fierce kiss that tasted of promises and possession. "Ready?" The sounds of battle grew louder as they made their way through the palace corridors. Servants fled past them towards secure areas while guards rushed toward the fighting. The clash of steel and shouts of men echoed through the halls. They emerged into the main courtyard to find chaos. Blackthorn's men had indeed breached the walls, and palace guards were fighting desperately to contain them. At the centre of it all stood a man Lyra recognised with a chill of terror, Lord Blackthorn himself, his cold eyes scanning the battlefield until they found her. "There she is!" he called out, pointing directly at them. "Take the girl alive! Kill anyone who stands in your way!" A group of soldiers broke from the main battle, charging toward them with weapons raised. Darius stepped in front of Lyra, his sword singing as it left its sheath. "You want her?" he called back to Blackthorn, his voice carrying across the courtyard with supernatural authority. "Come and take her." What followed was like watching a force of nature unleashed. Darius moved with inhuman speed and strength, his blade a silver blur as he cut through attackers like they were made of paper. But there were so many of them, and more kept coming. Lyra saw the soldier approaching from Darius's blind spot and didn't think. Training her father had given her years ago took over. She grabbed a fallen guard's dagger and threw herself between the attacker and her mate. The soldier's sword bit deep into her shoulder instead of Darius's back. Pain exploded through her system, but she managed to drive her dagger into the man's chest before he could strike again. "Lyra!" Darius's roar of fury shook the very stones of the courtyard. She'd never heard anything like it. Pure alpha rage at seeing his mate threatened. The change that came over him was terrifying and magnificent. His eyes blazed with silver fire, and power radiated from him in waves that made the air itself seem to tremble. Every enemy soldier within 20 feet suddenly found themselves facing not just a king, but an apex predator defending his mate. Through the pain and chaos, Lyra felt something new flowing through the bond between them. Strength, healing warmth, Darius's power sharing itself with her, knitting her wound closed while simultaneously fueling her own abilities. "Impossible!" Blackthorn breathed, staring at them from across the battlefield. "She's just a farm girl." "She's my queen," Darius snarled, and the words carried such absolute authority that several enemy soldiers actually stopped fighting to stare. "And you've just made the last mistake of your miserable life." The battle turned in that moment. Lyra found herself moving with supernatural speed and strength, the mate bond amplifying her natural abilities beyond anything human. Together, she and Darius carved through Blackthorn's forces like they were one entity with a single purpose. But Blackthorn had one last card to play. As his men fell around him, he produced a small horn and blew a sharp, piercing note. "If I can't have the girl," he called out, "then no one can." The ground beneath them began to shake, and Lyra heard the distinct sound of hundreds more hoofbeats approaching. Reinforcements. He planned this, she realised. He wanted to draw you out into open battle. "Then he succeeded," Darius said grimly, wiping blood from his sword, but he underestimated what he was challenging. As the new wave of enemies poured into the courtyard, Darius pulled Lyra close, his hand burning hot against the mark on her shoulder where his power had healed her wound. "Are you ready for this, little mate?" She looked around at the overwhelming odds, then back at his face, fierce and protective and utterly devoted to keeping her safe. The golden thread between them thrummed with shared purpose. "With you, I'm ready for anything." His smile was pure predator. "Good, because they're about to learn why you don't threaten an alpha's mate." The scent marking that followed was unlike anything she could have imagined. Darius's mouth found the curve of her neck, and when his teeth grazed her skin, power flooded through her like liquid lightning. The mark he left was visible proof of their bond, a silver crescent moon that would mark her as his for all to see. "Mine," he growled against her neck, and the word resonated through the mate bond with the force of an oath. "Yours," she agreed, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. "Always yours." When they broke apart, her skin bore his mark, and his eyes carried silver fire. The message was clear to every person in that courtyard. She was claimed, protected, and precious beyond measure. Blackthorn's face went white as he finally understood what he was facing. Not just a king and his ally, but true mates whose bond made them exponentially more dangerous together than apart. "Attack!" he screamed to his reinforcements. "Kill them both!" Lyra felt Darius's power surge through their connection, amplifying her strength and speed to supernatural levels. When the first wave of enemies reached them, they moved as one entity, his sword and her daggers finding every weakness, every opening. The battle that followed would be remembered in songs for generations to come. Two mates fighting as one, their bond turning them into an unstoppable force that carved through an army like it was nothing more than an obstacle standing between them and their future. By the time the sun reached its peak, the courtyard was littered with defeated enemies, and Lord Blackthorn knelt in chains, his rebellion crushed and his power broken. "Where is her brother?" Darius demanded, his voice still carrying echoes of alpha authority. "Mountain fortress," Blackthorn spat, "but you'll never reach him in time. I sent word the moment the battle began. If I fall, he dies." Lyra felt her heart stop, but Darius's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "You underestimate us again," he said calmly. "We're not going to the mountain fortress." "What?" "Captain Thorn departed with a rescue team the moment you attacked. While you were so focused on capturing my mate, my best soldiers were already on their way to free her brother." His smile was cold. "Your attack was the distraction we needed." Blackthorn's face crumpled in defeat, and Lyra felt something tight in her chest finally ease. Marcus would be safe. They had won. "You're brilliant," she whispered to Darius, and his expression softened instantly. "We're brilliant," he corrected, bringing their joined hands to his lips. "Together, we're unstoppable." The mark on her shoulder pulsed with warmth, and through the bond she felt his absolute certainty. They were mated now, truly and completely. Whatever came next, they would face it together. "Ready to go home, my queen?" Lyra looked around the courtyard, at the defeated enemies, the celebrating guards, the palace that was already beginning to feel like the home she'd never had. "With you? I already am home." The sun was setting behind the mountain peaks when Captain Thorn's riders appeared on the horizon, and Lyra's heart nearly stopped when she saw the familiar figure slumped in one of the saddles. "Marcus," she breathed, and without thinking, she was running across the courtyard toward the approaching horses. Darius kept pace beside her easily, his presence a steady warmth through their bond. The mark on her shoulder pulsed with shared emotion, relief, joy, and an underlying current of fierce protectiveness that she was beginning to recognize as uniquely his. Her brother looked terrible, thin and pale, with dark circles under his eyes and healing bruises marking his face, but he was alive. When he saw her, his expression shifted from exhausted resignation to pure disbelief. "Lyra?" His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "But you look like myself for the first time in weeks," she said, tears streaming down her face as she reached up to help him from the horse. "Oh, Marcus, I was so afraid we'd lost you." He slid down into her embrace, and she felt how thin he'd gotten, how he trembled with exhaustion. But he was warm and real and safe in her arms, and that was all that mattered. "I don't understand," he said, holding her tight. "The last thing I remember clearly was Blackthorn's men dragging me away. Then there was the dungeon, and they kept asking about you, about what you might do to rescue me. But you're here, and you're—" His gaze moved past her to where Darius stood, taking in the king's protective stance and the way his silver-gold eyes remained fixed on her. "Lyra, what happened?" "A lot," she said with a watery laugh. "But the important part is that you're safe now. We both are." Captain Thorne approached, his armour still bearing traces of recent battle. "Your Majesty, the mountain fortress has been secured. We found 12 other prisoners in addition to her brother, all nobles who had been reported missing over the past months." "Casualties?" Darius asked, though his attention remained primarily on Lyra and Marcus. 3 wounded, none dead. Blackthorn's remaining forces surrendered once they realised their leader had fallen. Thorne's expression was grimly satisfied. "The rebellion is finished." Marcus looked between them with growing confusion. "Your Majesty, Lyra, why is the Alpha King speaking to you like—" His eyes widened as understanding dawned. "The mark on your shoulder, that's a mate bond mark." Heat flooded her cheeks, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "Yes, it is." "You're mated to the Alpha King?" Marcus's voice cracked on the words. "I am." She reached back without looking, and Darius's hand immediately found hers, their fingers intertwining with perfect familiarity. "It's complicated, but it's simple," Darius interrupted gently. "Your sister is my fated mate, and she's going to be my queen." The words hung in the air, and Lyra felt a flutter of panic. They hadn't actually discussed the queen part in detail, and suddenly she was very aware that they had an audience of soldiers and servants all watching this conversation with fascination. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, then did something completely unexpected. He started laughing. "What's so funny?" she demanded. "You," he said, wiping tears from his eyes. "Do you remember when we were children and you used to say you were going to marry a king some day? I was 7 years old. And now you actually did it." He looked at Darius with a new respect. "Though I have to ask, Your Majesty, are you sure you know what you're getting yourself into? My sister is incredibly stubborn." "I've noticed," Darius said dryly. "It's one of the things I love most about her." Love. The word sent warmth spiralling through her chest, even though she knew he probably hadn't meant it quite the way it sounded. They'd known each other less than a week, even if the mate bond made it feel like a lifetime. "Come," Darius said, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. "You both need food and rest. The formalities can wait until tomorrow." But as they turned toward the palace, a commotion near the gates drew their attention. A crowd was gathering, and Lyra realised with growing alarm that word of the day's events was already spreading. Palace servants, guards, and even some citizens from the nearby town had come to see the woman who had captured their king's heart. "Your Majesty," called one of the guards, "the people wish to see their new queen." Queen. There was that word again, spoken now by others, as if it were already decided. Lyra felt a moment of pure panic. She wasn't ready for this. She didn't know how to be a queen. But then Darius's hand tightened on hers, and his voice carried across the courtyard with absolute authority. "Then let them see her." He led her forward, and somehow, despite her fear, she found herself walking with her head high. The mark on her shoulder blazed with warmth, and through their bond she felt his absolute confidence in her. The crowd fell silent as they approached. Lyra had expected judgment, perhaps resentment that their king had chosen a commoner. Instead, she saw curiosity and something that looked almost like awe. "People of Astoria," Darius announced, his voice carrying easily across the gathered crowd. "Today you witnessed an attack on our kingdom by Lord Blackthorne and his forces. You saw them defeated not just by your king, but by the woman who stands beside me now." A murmur ran through the crowd, and Lyra felt every eye upon her. This woman infiltrated enemy territory to save her family. She faced down an army to protect those she loves. She fought beside me as an equal, and she bears my mark as my chosen mate. His voice grew stronger, more commanding. "She is Lyra of House Thornwood, and she will be your queen." The crowd erupted, not in protest or anger, but in cheers. They had witnessed her courage first-hand during the battle, had seen her stand beside their king against impossible odds. To them, she wasn't just a commoner who had caught the king's fancy. She was a warrior who had proven herself worthy. "All hail Queen Lyra!" someone shouted, and the cry was taken up by dozens of voices. "All hail the Queen! All hail the Queen!" Lyra felt tears pricking her eyes as the sound washed over her. These people, these strangers, were accepting her, not because of her bloodline or her wealth or her political connections, but because of her actions, because she had stood up and fought for what mattered. Darius leaned close to her ear. "What do you say, my queen? Are you ready to accept your crown?" She looked out at the crowd of faces, hopeful, welcoming, trusting. Then she looked at Marcus, who was beaming at her with pride. Finally, she looked at Darius, whose silver gold eyes held nothing but love and certainty. "Yes," she said, loud enough for the crowd to hear, "I'm ready." The cheer that went up could probably be heard 3 kingdoms over. Later, after Marcus had been settled in a guest chamber with a healer tending his injuries and a feast ordered to help him regain his strength, Lyra found herself alone with Darius in his private study. The same room where her deception had finally crumbled and the truth had set them both free. "Regrets?" he asked, settling into his chair and pulling her down onto his lap. She considered the question seriously. About Marcus? Never. About Blackthorn? He got what he deserved. About us? She touched the mate mark on her shoulder, feeling the warmth that always accompanied his presence. How can I regret something that feels so right? Even though it happened so quickly? The bond may have awakened quickly, but this, she gestured between them, this feels like it was always meant to be, like I was sleepwalking through life until I met you. His arms tightened around her. "I know exactly what you mean. I've been king for 8 years, Lyra, but I've never felt like I was truly living until you walked into my palace wearing that terrible disguise." She laughed. "It was a good disguise." "It was an awful disguise. You're far too beautiful to hide, even under men's clothing and short hair." Flatterer. Truth-teller. He pressed a kiss to the mark on her shoulder, and she shivered at the sensation. The coronation will need to be planned. Traditional ceremonies, formal presentations to the neighbouring kingdom's ambassadors, a proper wedding ceremony for those who weren't present to witness our claiming. All of that sounds very official and terrifying. It is, but you won't face it alone. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining automatically. "We'll do it together, just like everything else." "Together," she agreed, and the word felt like a promise, like a vow. "There is one more thing," Darius said, his voice taking on a formal tone that made her look at him questioningly. "What?" "The council has requested a formal audience tomorrow. They want to officially acknowledge you as queen and discuss—" He paused. "The political implications of our mating." Lyra felt her stomach clench. "Political implications?" "You're not nobility, Lyra. Some of them will have concerns about precedent, about what it means for the kingdom's alliance structures." His hand cupped her cheek. "But today proved that you're exactly the kind of queen this kingdom needs. Strong, brave, willing to fight for those who can't fight for themselves. And if they disagree—" His smile was all predator. "Then they can take it up with me, but I don't think it will come to that. You have Marcus safe, Blackthorn defeated, and a kingdom full of people who witnessed your courage today. You're not a political liability. Lyra, you're exactly what this kingdom has been waiting for." The certainty in his voice made her chest tight with emotion. "I don't know how to be a queen." "You don't know how to be the kind of queen others have been. But you know how to be the kind of queen you are, fierce, protective, willing to sacrifice everything for those you love. That's more valuable than any amount of royal training." Through their bond, she felt his absolute faith in her, his complete confidence that she would not just survive as queen, but thrive. It was overwhelming and humbling and empowering all at once. "I love you," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. His entire expression transformed. "Say that again." "I love you, Darius. I don't know how it happened so fast, and I don't understand half of what I'm feeling, but I love you." "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than my kingdom, more than my crown, more than my own life. You are everything to me, Lyra. Everything." When he kissed her, it tasted of promises and forever, and a love that would withstand any challenge the future might bring. Tomorrow would bring councils and ceremonies and the 1,000 responsibilities of ruling a kingdom. But tonight they were just Darius and Lyra, two mates who had found each other against all odds, and who would face whatever came next together. "Ready for tomorrow, my queen." Lyra smiled, feeling the truth of her new title settle into her bones like something that had always belonged there. "With you, I'm ready for anything." 3 months later, Lyra woke to sunlight streaming through the tall windows of the royal chambers and the familiar warmth of Darius's arms around her. Some mornings she still couldn't believe this was her life, that she, a farmer's daughter who had once disguised herself as a servant, now shared the bed of the Alpha King and wore a crown that felt more natural with each passing day. "Good morning, my queen," Darius murmured against her hair, his voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning, my king." She turned in his arms, never tiring of the way his silver-gold eyes softened when they found her face. "Sleep well?" "Always when I'm holding you." His hand found the mate mark on her shoulder, thumb tracing the silver crescent that had become her favourite jewellery. "Though I suspect we'll have little time for lazy mornings once the delegation from the northern kingdoms arrives." Lyra groaned, burying her face against his chest. "Don't remind me. 3 days of formal dinners and diplomatic negotiations." "You'll be magnificent," he said, with absolute certainty. "You've taken to royal duties like you were born to them." It was true, though it had surprised everyone, including herself. The girl who had once felt out of place in her own skin had discovered a talent for leadership that seemed to emerge naturally when she stopped trying to be what others expected and simply became herself. A soft knock interrupted their morning quiet. "Come in," Darius called, and Marcus stepped through the door carrying a breakfast tray. "Good morning, your majesties," he said with exaggerated formality, though his eyes danced with mischief. "Your breakfast as requested." Lyra laughed, sitting up and pulling the sheets around herself. In the months since his rescue, Marcus had recovered completely from his ordeal and had found his place as captain of the Royal Guard. The position suited him perfectly. He had their father's strategic mind and a fierce protective streak that made him invaluable in protecting the royal family. "You know you don't have to serve us breakfast personally," Lyra pointed out, as he set the tray on the small table by the window. "I know, but I enjoy seeing my little sister living in luxury after all those years of porridge and stale bread." He grinned at her. "Besides, it's the only time I can tease the Queen of Astoria without getting arrested for treason." "I could still have you thrown in the dungeons," she said loftily. "You could try," Marcus replied, "but I'm fairly certain your king would object to his wife abusing her power." "Wife," Darius repeated with satisfaction. "I do like the sound of that." Their formal wedding ceremony had taken place 6 weeks ago, a grand affair that had drawn nobility from across the continent. But for Lyra, the real marriage had begun the night she'd finally told him the truth in his study. Everything since then had just been making it official. "Speaking of royal duties," Marcus said, settling into a chair with the easy familiarity that came from being family. "The morning briefing is ready whenever you are. The reports from the eastern provinces are particularly interesting." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "Good interesting or concerning interesting?" "Good, I think. The infrastructure improvements you suggested have increased crop yields by 30%. The people are calling it the Queen's prosperity." Marcus's expression grew serious. "They love you, Lyra, not because you married the king, but because you understand them, because you've lived the life they live." The words filled her chest with warmth. In the months since her coronation, she had thrown herself into learning about the kingdom's needs, particularly in the rural areas where her own background gave her insights that years of noble education couldn't provide. "The council meeting this afternoon should be interesting," Darius added, reaching for his coffee. "Lord Aldrich has been suspiciously cooperative lately." "Probably because he's afraid I'll have him assigned to mucking out the royal stables," Lyra said sweetly. "I haven't forgotten his attitude during those first days." "You know," Marcus said thoughtfully, "I think he's actually developed genuine respect for you. Yesterday I overheard him telling the ambassador from Valdris that Queen Lyra's strategic mind rivals any military commander he's known." "High praise from Lord Aldrich," Darius observed. "He's not one for empty flattery." An hour later, after Marcus had left to attend to his duties and they had shared breakfast on their private balcony, Lyra stood before her wardrobe, contemplating the day ahead. The deep emerald gown she selected was elegant but practical, perfect for a morning of reviewing agricultural reports and an afternoon of diplomatic meetings. "You're thinking too hard," Darius said, coming up behind her to fasten the delicate silver chain that held the royal seal. "I'm thinking about the irrigation proposals for the southern districts," she admitted, "and the trade agreements with the coastal cities, and whether we're doing enough for the families displaced by Blackthorn's rebellion." His hands settled on her shoulders, steady and warm. "You're thinking about everything at once. It's one of your greatest strengths and your most exhausting habit. Someone has to think about these things." "Someone does. Several someones, in fact. You've built an excellent team of advisers, and you don't have to carry every burden alone." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Though I love that you try." The morning passed quickly in a blur of meetings and reports. Lyra had discovered she had a natural talent for governance, particularly in areas that involved understanding people's needs and finding practical solutions. Her background as a commoner proved invaluable when addressing issues that nobles often overlooked entirely. During the afternoon council meeting, she found herself in heated but respectful debate with Lord Aldrich about military spending. "Your Majesty," Lord Aldrich was saying, "while I appreciate your concern for infrastructure, we cannot neglect our defence capabilities." "I'm not suggesting we neglect them," Lyra replied calmly. "I'm suggesting we be strategic about how we allocate resources. Building better roads and improving crop yields makes us stronger as a kingdom, which in turn makes us more difficult to attack." "An interesting perspective," Ambassador Voss from the Northern Kingdoms interjected. He'd arrived early for the formal negotiations and had been invited to observe the council session. "In my homeland, we've found that economic stability often provides better security than military might alone." "Exactly," Lyra said, warming to the topic. "A prosperous people are a loyal people. A hungry people are easily swayed by promises of better treatment from invaders." Lord Aldrich considered this. "You're suggesting that feeding people is a form of defence?" "I'm suggesting that caring for people is the strongest foundation any kingdom can build." She leaned forward slightly. "Military strength protects our borders, but genuine prosperity protects our hearts. And when people fight to defend something they truly love, they're unbeatable." The silence that followed was thoughtful rather than dismissive. Finally, Lord Aldrich nodded slowly. "I believe I'm beginning to understand your approach, Your Majesty. Perhaps we could explore a combination strategy, modest increases in military efficiency while expanding the infrastructure improvements that have proven so successful." "Now you're thinking like a statesman," Darius said with approval, and Lyra felt a flush of pride at the respect in his voice. After the meeting ended and the ambassador had been escorted to his quarters, Lyra found herself alone with Darius in the royal gardens. It was their favourite place for private conversations, surrounded by roses and flowering trees that reminded her of simpler times. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, settling beside her on their favourite stone bench. "I was thinking about how much has changed," she said, leaning against his shoulder. 3 months ago, I was a desperate girl planning an impossible infiltration. Now I'm sitting in council meetings, debating agricultural policy with ambassadors." "Regrets?" Never. She turned to look at him fully. But sometimes I wonder if I'm dreaming, if I'll wake up back in that cottage and Marcus will still be missing and none of this will be real. This is real, he said firmly, taking her hands in his. You are real. Our bond is real. Everything we've built together is real. I know, logically I know, but emotionally, she struggled to find the words. I never imagined I could be happy like this, content and challenged and useful all at once. You've found your purpose. I've found my place, she corrected, with you in this life we're building together. Darius smiled, the expression transforming his face from commanding king to devoted husband. Speaking of building together, I have something to discuss with you. Oh? The Northern Kingdom's ambassador isn't just here for trade negotiations. He's here because they've heard about our unconventional approach to governance, the way you've integrated common sense with royal policy. His eyes danced with mischief. Apparently several kingdoms are interested in learning from our example. Lyra blinked. They want to learn from us? They want to learn from you, the queen who was born a commoner but rules like she understands every level of society. He brought their joined hands to his lips. You're becoming something of a legend, my love. That's ridiculous. I'm just doing what makes sense. Exactly. And what makes sense to someone who has lived as both a farmer's daughter and a queen is apparently quite revolutionary in royal circles. Before Lyra could respond, Marcus appeared at the entrance to the garden, his expression carefully neutral in the way that meant he had news but wasn't sure how they would receive it. What is it? Darius asked immediately. A messenger from the western border, your majesties. Lord Garrett's daughter has gone missing. Lyra was on her feet instantly. Missing how? Kidnapped? Lost? Unknown. She was visiting friends in Millbrook and simply vanished 2 nights ago. Marcus's expression was grim. Lord Garrett is requesting royal assistance. Of course, Lyra said without hesitation. We'll leave at first light. We? Darius raised an eyebrow. You don't think I'm staying here while there's a young woman in danger, do you? She met his eyes steadily. This is exactly the kind of situation where my background might prove useful. I understand what it's like to be afraid and alone. It could be dangerous. So was infiltrating your palace, but that worked out rather well. She smiled at him. Besides, I seem to recall someone promising that we would face everything together. I did say that, he admitted. Then it's settled. Marcus, prepare a small travelling party. We'll investigate personally. As Marcus hurried off to make arrangements, Darius caught her hand. This is what you want? To involve yourself directly in these situations? This is who I am, she replied. I'm not the kind of queen who sits in a palace and sends others to handle problems. I'm the kind of queen who gets her hands dirty. I know, he said softly. It's one of the 1,000 things I love about you. That evening, as they prepared for their departure, Lyra stood once again before the mirror in their chambers. But this time, instead of seeing a stranger, she saw herself clearly. Not the desperate girl who had cut her hair and stolen men's clothes, and not some impossible ideal of royal perfection. She saw Queen Lyra of Astoria, a woman who had found her place in the world by refusing to pretend to be anyone other than who she truly was. "Ready?" Darius asked, coming up behind her to wrap his arms around her waist. "Ready," she said, leaning back against his chest and watching their reflection. "Though I have to ask, are you prepared for a queen who's going to spend her reign racing off to solve other people's problems?" "My love," he said, pressing a kiss to her marked shoulder. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As they prepared to leave the palace on their first joint mission as king and queen, Lyra reflected on how far they'd both come. She had walked into his palace as a liar and a deceiver, terrified and desperate. Now she walked out as his equal partner, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities and adventures, and the kind of love that could weather any storm. And whatever came next, they would meet it together, just as they had promised on that first night when truth had finally set them both free. Where are you listening from tonight? I hope this story brought you the same comfort and joy it brought me to tell. If you'd like to support more stories like this one, please consider subscribing. Until next time, sweet dreams.